Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking you on a journey through the world of international investment. And specifically, we're going to be using the World Investment Report 2024 from UNCTAD to try to understand all the latest trends and how countries are attracting investors and making it easier to do business.
Right.
Buckle up. It's a dense report,
Yeah.
but we're going to pull out the juiciest bits and make sense of it all.
It's a fascinating report, especially for anyone who's interested in understanding the forces that are shaping the global economy.
Right. So the report kicks off with a bit of a reality check. Global foreign direct investment, or FDI. Took a dip in 2023, not exactly a surprise with all the uncertainty swirling around in the world economy right now.
Right.
But the report also points to this trend of economic fracturing. Sounds a bit ominous, doesn't it?
It does. It essentially refers to this increasing tendency for countries to prioritize national interests over global cooperation, which can lead to protectionist policies and trade barriers, which obviously create headwinds for cross-border investment.
Makes sense. And on top of that, financing has been tougher to come by, with interest rates rising globally. But then there's this intriguing tidbit about greenfield projects, the report says. Announcements for those are actually up. Now, for those unfamiliar with the term, greenfield projects refer to investments in brand new facilities, unlike mergers or acquisitions.
Yeah.
This seems to signal a bit of hope, right?
Absolutely. It suggests that despite the overall downturn, investors are still looking for opportunities for long-term growth. Greenfield projects involve building something new, creating jobs, contributing to the real economy. It's a strong signal that investors aren't completely spooked.
Okay, so maybe not all doom and gloom. And it's worth noting that the report shows many multinational enterprises, or M&Es, have been raking in profits lately. Does that give them more ammo to invest, even in a shaky global environment?
Exactly. High M&E profits coupled with the fact that financing conditions are starting to ease up a bit paint a cautiously optimistic picture for 2024.
Interesting. So there's money to be invested, but the big question is, where's it all going? Is it spread out evenly, or are some regions winning while others lose?
That's where it gets really interesting. The report shows some pretty stark regional differences. Developing Asia, for example, saw an 8% drop in FDI. Even China, long considered an FDI magnet, experienced a decline.
Wow, China down too. I wouldn't have guessed that. Any theories from the report on what's behind that shift?
Well, it's likely a combination of factors. China's economic slowdown, rising geopolitical tensions, and perhaps some investors looking to diversify their portfolios beyond a single country. But while Asia saw a decline, the report highlights a fascinating paradox. The largest greenfield project, announced globally this year, was actually in Africa, a massive green hydrogen project in Mauritania.
Hold on. The biggest project in Africa, while FDI there is down overall. That's a bit of a head scratcher.
It is. And it highlights the importance of looking beyond the top-level numbers and digging into the details. Africa, despite the overall decline, is seeing investment in key strategic sectors, like renewable energy, driven by the global push for a clean energy transition.
Ah, that makes sense. So it's not just where the money is going, but what it's being invested in. Speaking of which, let's get down to brass tacks. What industries are attracting the most investment right now? This is where it gets relevant for you, dear listener.
When we look at greenfield projects, the energy and gas supply sector is still dominant. No big surprise there. But what's really eye-catching is the growth in electronics and electrical equipment, semiconductors, batteries, all the components powering our increasingly digital world. Those are booming.
So even with all the talk about renewables, traditional energy is still king. But it sounds like the clean energy transition is fueling a wave of investment in related sectors. What about the digital world itself?
Well, that's where it gets interesting. Greenfield investments in information and communication technologies actually saw a big drop. Why? That's a question the report leaves open. Perhaps it's a sign of market saturation. Or maybe companies are shifting their digital investment strategies.
Definitely something to ponder. Now, I can't ignore the elephant in the room. Sustainability. The report talks about investments linked to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. Are investors putting their money where their mouths are when it comes to these global goals?
It's a bit of a mixed bag. Overall, SDG-targeted investments are stagnant, which is a major concern. The report highlights the massive financing gap that still exists when it comes to achieving these goals. However, there are bright spots within developing economies, particularly in certain sectors.
Okay, give me the good news. Which sectors are seeing growth in SDG-related investments?
Well, infrastructure is up 8%, which is crucial for basic development. Then there's agri-food systems, which saw a 13% jump. Food security is always a hot topic, yeah, especially in a changing climate. And finally, health and education are up 6%, areas that directly impact people's lives.
Those are encouraging signs. It's heartening to see investment flowing towards areas that address basic needs and create a more equitable world. But earlier you mentioned that developing Asia was seeing a downturn in FDI. Does that mean they're lagging behind in these SDG-focused investments?
Quite the opposite, actually. Developing Asia is attracting the lion's share of these SDG-focused projects. This suggests they're prioritizing sustainable development, even as they navigate this shifting investment landscape.
So while global investment in the SDGs is sluggish overall, some regions are bucking the trend. It's fascinating to see how these global goals are playing out in the real world of investment decisions.
It really highlights how the idea of sustainable development is becoming increasingly integrated into business strategies and investment priorities.
Okay, now let's talk about how countries are attracting investment in the first place. The report dives into the nitty-gritty of investment policy. And it seems like investment facilitation is the new buzzword.
It is. It's not just about offering tax breaks or other financial incentives. It's about making the entire investment process smoother and more predictable. Think reducing red tape, making regulations clear and transparent, and creating a stable and reliable business environment.
Sounds like a recipe for a good business relationship. But how are countries actually putting this into practice? Are they really changing their policies?
They are. The report shows a clear shift away from traditional liberalization, just opening up markets and hoping for the best. There's a growing emphasis on making the investment process itself more efficient and attractive.
So less about tearing down walls and more about paving the way.
Exactly.
Sounds much more inviting.
And developing countries are leading the charge. The report found that a whopping 86% of their investment policies are now geared toward facilitating investment, using things like streamlined regulations and targeted incentive.
Wow, 86%. That's a pretty clear signal. They're not just talking the talk, they're walking the walk. When it comes to making their countries more attractive to investors,
They recognize that attracting FDI is key to economic growth and development. And in today's hyper-competitive world, making life easier for investors is a crucial part of the strategy.
all right, we've covered a lot of ground already. Global trends, regional dynamics, and the policy shifts shaping the investment landscape. But there's one more piece of the puzzle I want to explore before we wrap up part one: the connection between investment facilitation and digital government. The report keeps mentioning those two together. What's the link?
This is where it all starts to come together. The report argues that digital government is essential for making investment facilitation truly effective. It's about using technology to cut down on bureaucracy, increase transparency, and make the entire investment process faster and more efficient.
So we're talking about online applications, digital signatures, maybe even virtual company registration, the kind of things that make our everyday lives easier. In the digital age,
Precisely. Things like online single windows, where businesses can access all the information and services they need in one place, are becoming increasingly common. Imagine starting a company entirely online. No more shuffling paperwork or waiting in line at government offices.
sounds like a dream come true for anyone who's ever dealt with government bureaucracy. But it also raises the question, are developing countries equipped to implement these digital solutions?
That's where it gets really interesting. Developing countries actually have a unique opportunity to leapfrog ahead in this area. They can adopt the latest digital government technologies without being held back by outdated systems and legacy infrastructure.
So sometimes starting fresh can be an advantage. That's a perspective I hadn't considered, but it's one thing to have shiny new digital tools and another to actually see results. Does the report offer any evidence that this digital government stuff actually works?
It does. The report draws a clear link between digital government and positive outcomes for investment and broader economic development. We'll delve into those details in the next part of our deep dive. Stay tuned. Welcome back to our deep dive into the World Investment Report 2024. Before the break, we were talking about this fascinating link between digital government and investment. It's not just about making things easier for businesses. The report actually highlights some pretty compelling data on the broader impacts.
Okay, I'm all ears. Spill the data. How does digital government actually move the needle on investment and development?
Well, for starters, countries with more sophisticated digital government systems tend to see higher FDI inflows. Makes sense. Investors are more likely to put their money in places where doing business is efficient and predictable.
So more investment coming in, which is good news for any economy. What else?
They also see higher business creation rates when it's easier to start a company. More people take the plunge, leading to more jobs, innovation, and economic activity. That's something I'm sure our listeners can get behind.
Absolutely. Starting a business can be incredibly daunting, especially when you're wrestling with bureaucratic hurdles. Anything else?
Beyond those direct economic benefits, the report also links digital government to better institutional quality overall. It helps reduce corruption,
Hmm.
increase transparency, and promote accountability, all essential ingredients for good governance.
So it's not just about making life easier for investors. It's about creating a fairer and more efficient system for
Yeah,
everyone. It's a win-win situation.
exactly. Now, shifting gears a bit, I want to talk about another crucial aspect of the global investment landscape, international investment agreements, or IIAs.
Ah, IIAs.
I don't
It
know.
sounds a bit technical. Can you break it down for our listener? Why should they care about these agreements?
Well, IIAs are basically treaties between countries
Yes.
that set the rules of the road. For cross-border investment, they cover a wide range of issues from investor protection to dispute settlement, and increasingly they're incorporating provisions on, you guessed it,
Huh.
investment facilitation.
So they're like the rule book for how international investment works. That makes sense. What's the report saying about IIAs in 2024? Any major trends to watch out for?
The report highlights a kind of split.
Mm.
In the world of IIAs, on one hand, you have newer, more modern agreements that are embracing these new ideas about investment facilitation and sustainable development.
So the rule book is getting an update. Sounds like a positive development. What are some of the key changes we're seeing in these new generation IIAs?
Well, they're placing a greater emphasis on streamlining procedures, improving transparency, and promoting cooperation between countries. They're also more sensitive to the right of governments to regulate in the public interest, things like environmental protection, labor standards,
Mhm.
or public health.
Right. Countries don't want to just hand over control to
Mhm.
foreign investors. They need to balance attracting investment with protecting their citizens and their environment.
Exactly. And these newer IIAs are reflecting that more nuanced approach. But here's the catch. A lot of investment is still governed by older, more traditional agreements.
So we've got this new updated rule book, but everyone's still playing by the old rules. That sounds like a recipe for confusion.
It does create a complex landscape, both for investors and governments. The report estimates that about half of global FDI is still covered by these older agreements, which tend to prioritize investor protection over things like facilitation or sustainability.
And speaking of investor protection, the report also mentions something called Investor State Dispute Settlement, or ISDS. That sounds a bit intimidating. Can you demystify that for us?
Sure. ISDS is a mechanism that allows foreign investors to sue governments if they believe their investments have been treated unfairly. It's been a controversial issue for years, with critics arguing that it gives too much power to corporations and can undermine the ability of governments to regulate in the public interest.
So a foreign company could potentially sue a government if they don't like a new environmental regulation or a minimum wage increase. That seems like a pretty big deal.
It can be, and the report finds that the number of ISDS cases is actually on the rise, with developing countries often being targeted.
That's concerning. Are these newer IIAs doing anything to address those concerns about ISDS?
Some of them are. There's a growing trend toward reforming
Yeah.
or even eliminating ISDS in these newer agreements. But again, it's important to remember that a lot of investment is still governed by those older treaties that have more expansive ISDS provisions.
So it's a mixed bag when it comes to IIAs. Some positive steps toward modernization, but also some lingering challenges. It seems like this is an area where things are evolving rapidly, and it's something investors and policymakers need to keep a close eye on.
Absolutely. The debate over international investment rules is ongoing, and the World Investment Report underscores the importance of carefully considering the implications of these agreements and ensuring they're aligned with a country's development goals.
Okay, let's zoom out from the world of treaties and legalese for a moment. The report also covers sustainable finance, which has become a hot topic. In the investment world, what's the big picture there? Are investors actually putting their money where their mouths are when it comes to sustainability?
That's a great question. And it's one that the report delves into in quite a bit of detail. The good news is that the market for sustainable finance is growing rapidly. We're seeing a surge in investments that consider environmental, social, and governance factors, often referred to as ESG investing.
So more investors are looking for ways to align their portfolios with their values and maybe even make a positive impact on the world.
While they're at it, exactly, the report highlights the growth of things like green bonds, which are specifically designed to finance projects that have environmental benefits, like renewable energy or clean transportation. We're also seeing a proliferation of sustainable funds, which are investment products that incorporate ESG criteria into their investment decisions.
So there are more and more options out there for investors who want to put their money into companies and projects that are doing good for the planet. It sounds like a win-win. You can potentially earn a return while also contributing to a more sustainable future.
There's certainly a growing recognition that ESG factors can actually enhance financial performance over the long run. Companies that are well managed and addressing environmental and social risks are often more resilient and better positioned for long-term success. But here's the caveat. The report also cautions against greenwashing.
Greenwashing, that's a term I've heard thrown around. What exactly does it mean in this context?
It refers to the practice of exaggerating or misrepresenting the sustainability credentials of a company or investment product. Basically, is talking the talk.
Without walking the walk.
Right, trying to cash in on the sustainability trend without actually making meaningful changes. So how can investors avoid falling prey to greenwashing?
That's where due diligence comes in. Don't just take labels like green or sustainable at face value. Dig a little deeper, look at the company's track record, and scrutinize the specific investments being made. There are also independent organizations that provide ratings and assessments of companies' ESG performance, which can be helpful resources for investors. So a healthy dose of skepticism is always a good thing when it comes to investing, especially in an area like sustainable finance, where there's so much buzz and hype.
Exactly. The report emphasizes the importance of transparency and accountability. In sustainable finance, it calls for clear and consistent standards for measuring and reporting on ESG performance so that investors can make informed decisions.
That makes sense. If everyone's using different metrics and definitions, it's impossible to compare apples to apples and make meaningful assessments.
Right, and the report points out that while the sustainable finance market is expanding rapidly, the actual impact of these investments needs to be carefully assessed. It's not enough to just throw money at something labeled as green. The investments need to genuinely contribute to a more sustainable future.
So it's not just about how much money is flowing into sustainable finance,
Yeah.
but about where that money is going and what kind of impact it's having.
Exactly. Now shifting our focus to developing countries, I'm curious about their role in this sustainable finance landscape. Are they benefiting from this growing interest in ESG investing?
That's a crucial question. They often have the greatest need for investments in areas like renewable energy, clean infrastructure, and sustainable agriculture. Are those investments materializing?
That's where things get a bit more complicated. Developing countries face a number of challenges when it comes to attracting sustainable investment.
So even though they have the potential to offer both financial returns and positive impact, they're not necessarily getting the funding they need. What are some of the obstacles they're facing?
One major challenge is the lack of well-developed financial markets and regulatory frameworks. Investors, especially institutional investors, often prefer to invest in places where there's a clear legal framework, strong property rights, and a predictable business environment. These factors can be lacking in some developing countries.
That makes sense. Investors want to feel confident that their investments are protected and that they'll be able to get their money out if needed.
Right. And on top of that, there's still a perception among some investors that developing countries are inherently riskier. They might worry about political instability, currency fluctuations, or corruption.
So it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem. Developing countries need investment to develop, but they struggle to attract investment because they're not as developed. What can be done to break this cycle?
That's the million-dollar question. The report suggests a few key steps. First, developing countries need to prioritize building robust and transparent regulatory environments that inspire investor confidence.
So creating a level playing field where investors feel their investments are safe and the rules of the game are clear and fair.
Exactly. They also need to proactively promote investment opportunities, highlighting their commitment to sustainable development and showcasing the potential returns that can be generated.
So getting the word out and making a compelling case for why investors should choose their country.
Right. And of course, continued support from the international community is crucial. This includes things like providing development finance, technical assistance, and capacity building to help developing countries create more attractive investment climates.
It sounds like a multifaceted challenge that requires collaboration from both developed and developing countries. as well as international institutions and the private sector.
Absolutely. Addressing the financing gap for sustainable development in developing countries is a global imperative, and attracting more sustainable investment is a critical part of the solution.
All right, we're nearing the end of our deep dive, but there's one more piece I want to explore. The report talks about the growing role of institutional investors in shaping the sustainable finance landscape. Can you remind us who these institutional investors are and why they're so important?
Sure. Institutional investors are large organizations that manage vast pools of money on behalf of others. Think pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, endowments, and the like. They're the giants of the investment world. And their decisions can have a huge impact on where capital flows.
So if these big players start prioritizing sustainability, it could really shift the entire market right. What's the report saying about how institutional investors are approaching ESG investing?
Good news is that the report finds that institutional investors are increasingly incorporating sustainability into their investment strategies. They're doing things like assessing climate risks, engaging with companies on ESG issues, and even divesting from industries that are seen as unsustainable, like fossil fuels.
That's encouraging to hear. It sounds like these big players are starting to take sustainability seriously, both for ethical reasons and because they recognize the financial risks associated with ignoring it.
Absolutely. There's a growing understanding among institutional investors that ESG factors can impact long-term portfolio performance. They're also facing increasing pressure from their own beneficiaries, pension fund members, insurance policyholders, who demand more responsible and sustainable investment practices.
So it's not just about doing good, it's also about responding to the changing expectations of their clients. That makes a lot of sense. And the report also mentions something about disclosure and reporting standards in the context of sustainable finance. Can you explain why that's important?
Sure. Transparency is crucial. For investors to make informed decisions, they need reliable and comparable information about companies' ESG performance. That's where disclosure and reporting standards come in. They provide a framework for companies to disclose their ESG-related data in a consistent and standardized way.
So it's like creating a common language. For sustainability reporting, if everyone's using the same metrics and definitions, investors can easily compare different companies and make informed decisions based on apples-to-apples comparisons.
Exactly. And the report highlights the growing importance of these standards. They're becoming more sophisticated and widely adopted, which is helping to create a more transparent and accountable sustainable investment ecosystem.
That's a positive development. It seems like the sustainable finance landscape is becoming more mature and sophisticated, which is good news for investors, companies, and the planet.
Absolutely. There's still work to be done, of course, but the progress in recent years has been significant, and the World Investment Report 2024 paints a cautiously optimistic picture of the future of sustainable finance.
This has been a truly in-depth exploration of the World Investment Report. We've covered a lot of ground, from digital government to international investment agreements, sustainable finance, and the evolving role of institutional investors.
It's been quite a journey, and we've only just scratched the surface. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to circle back to our listener and highlight a few key takeaways.
Great idea. Let's distill all this information into some actionable insights. What's the first big takeaway? For our listeners,
the first takeaway is that the investment landscape is changing. The old ways of doing things, simply opening up markets or offering tax breaks, are no longer enough to attract FDI.
It's a more complex and competitive world out there. Investors are looking for more than just financial incentives.
Exactly. Countries need to be more proactive and strategic in their approach to investment. They need to focus on creating a business-friendly environment that's efficient, transparent, and predictable.
That means embracing things like digital government, streamlining regulations, and ensuring a stable and reliable legal framework. No more bureaucratic nightmares for investors.
Right. And this applies not just to developing countries, but to developed economies as well. In today's globalized world, every country is competing for investment capital.
So lesson number one, adapt or be left behind. What's the second big takeaway our listeners should keep in mind?
The second takeaway is that sustainability is no longer a niche concern. It's becoming a core consideration for investors of all types, from individuals managing their personal portfolios to large institutions overseeing billions of dollars.
We saw that in the report's discussion of sustainable finance, green bonds, ESG funds, institutional investors incorporating sustainability into their strategies. It's a clear trend.
And this trend is only going to accelerate in the coming years. As the impacts of climate change become more apparent and consumer demand for sustainable products grows, investors are going to be increasingly looking for opportunities to align their portfolios with a more sustainable future.
So takeaway number 2, sustainability matters, both for the planet and for your portfolio.
And a corollary to that is the importance of due diligence. Don't just take labels like green or sustainable at face value. Dig deeper to understand the underlying investments and ensure they genuinely align with your values and your investment goals.
Great point. Greenwashing is a real risk, and critical thinking is essential in the world of investing.
Now for our third and final takeaway.
Drum roll, please.
The third takeaway is that the way we think about investment needs to evolve. It's not just about maximizing financial returns. It's about creating a more sustainable and inclusive future for all.
That's a powerful message. Investment can be a force for good, but it needs to be channeled in the right direction.
Exactly. We need to move beyond the traditional focus on purely financial metrics and consider the broader societal and environmental impacts of our investment decisions.
So takeaway number 3, think beyond the bottom line. Consider the long-term consequences of your investments and strive to create a more just and sustainable world.
That's a great way to sum it up. The World Investment Report 2024 paints a complex and nuanced picture of the global investment landscape. There are challenges to be sure, but there are also reasons for optimism.
Absolutely. We're seeing a shift towards a more sustainable and inclusive approach to investment, driven by both investor demand and government policies.
And this shift presents a unique opportunity for those who are willing to embrace change and think differently about the role of investment in society.
That's an inspiring note to end on. I hope our deep dive so far has given you, the listener, a better understanding of the forces shaping the future of investment and empowered you to make more informed and impactful decisions.
It's been a pleasure sharing these insights with you. We'll be back in just a moment. For the final part of our deep dive, we will wrap things up and leave you with some food for thought. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the World Investment Report 2024. We've explored a ton of information from global investment trends and the rise of digital government to the complexities of sustainable finance and the evolving role of institutional investors. It's been quite a journey.
It has.
But as we wrap up, it's important to kind of step back and ask, so what does all this mean for our listener?
Right.
How can they apply these insights to their own lives, whether they're investors, business leaders, or simply engaged citizens?
That's a great point.
We don't want to just throw information at you. We want to empower you to make sense of it all and see how it connects to the bigger picture.
So let's distill some key takeaways.
Okay, let's do it. What's the first big takeaway we want to leave our listeners with?
First and foremost, the investment landscape is changing. Gone are the days when simply opening up markets or offering tax breaks was a guaranteed recipe for attracting foreign direct investment.
It's a much more competitive world out there, and investors are becoming more discerning. They're looking for more than just financial incentives. Countries need to be more proactive and strategic in their approach to investment.
They need to focus on creating a business-friendly environment that's efficient, transparent, and predictable.
So that means embracing things like digital government, streamlining regulations, ensuring a stable and reliable legal framework, no more bureaucratic nightmares for investors.
Right.
And this isn't just relevant for developing countries. Developed economies need to step up their game as well. In today's globalized world, everyone is vying for investment capital. So lesson number 1, adapt or be left behind. What's the second big takeaway our listeners should keep in mind?
The second takeaway is that sustainability is no longer a niche concern. It's becoming a core consideration for investors of all types, from individuals managing their personal portfolios to large institutions overseeing billions of dollars.
We saw that clearly in the report's discussion of sustainable finance, green bonds, ESG funds, institutional investors integrating sustainability into their strategies.
A powerful trend that's only gaining momentum.
And this trend is likely to accelerate in the coming years as the impacts of climate change become more apparent and consumer demand for sustainable products grows. Investors are going to be increasingly looking for opportunities to align their portfolios with a more sustainable future. So takeaway number 2, sustainability matters, both for the planet and for your portfolio.
And a crucial point to add to that, don't just take labels like green or sustainable at face value. Do your due diligence. Dig deeper to understand the underlying investments and make sure they genuinely align with your values and your investment goals.
That's such a crucial point. Greenwashing is a real risk, and critical thinking is essential in the world of investing. Always look beyond the marketing and examine the substance behind the claims.
Now for our third
Yeah.
and final takeaway.
Okay.
The third takeaway is that our very notion of investment needs to evolve. It's no longer just about maximizing financial returns. It's about creating a more sustainable and inclusive future for all.
That's a powerful message. Investment can be a force for good in the world, but it needs to be channeled in the right direction.
Exactly.
We need to move beyond the traditional focus on purely financial metrics and consider the broader societal and environmental impacts of our investment decisions. So takeaway number 3, think beyond the bottom line. Consider the long-term consequences of your investments and strive to create a more just and sustainable world.
Well said.
The World Investment Report 2024 offers a complex and nuanced view of the global investment landscape. There are certainly challenges ahead, but there are also reasons for optimism. We're seeing a shift towards a more sustainable and inclusive approach to investment, driven by both investor demand and government policies.
And this shift presents a unique opportunity for those who are willing to embrace change and think differently about the role of investment in society.
It's been great having you.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the World Investment Report 2024. We'll be back soon with another exploration of a topic that matters. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged in building a better future.